Ladies and gentlemen, we are going live on Facebook and on Twitter, and it's Saturday, it's Scotland, it's 1 p.m, and it is a Force for Good's Saturday Street Stall, coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConaughey. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we have a lot to talk about this week. It's been an interesting week. It's going to be an interesting week coming up. We're broadcasting live on Twitter via this camera here, and we're broadcasting live on Facebook via this camera here. And we can't be out on the streets at this time, but we can be here with you in the comfort of your own home, dropping knowledge about the Great British Union, about what we like to call the Great Kingdom of United Britain, that we're all so blessed to be part of. As I say, Facebook on this camera and Twitter on this camera, and thanks for coming in and joining us. Now, today is Saturday the 2nd of May, and we would have been out on the streets today because the SNP supporting group known as All Under One Banner were going to be having a separatist shuffle through the streets of Glasgow today. The divisive dawdlers were going to be winding and wobbling their weary way through the streets of Glasgow to much public disdain and inconvenience. And we would have been a force for good. We would have been there. And we would have been standing, as we were this time last year, with our thin red line of pro-British Unionist supporters. And we would have been there to remind the divisive dawdlers, to remind the separatist shufflers that they are part of something much larger and much greater, that we are all so happy to be part of, and which serves us all so well, and which we take so much for granted. I'm talking, of course, about our United Kingdom. So we would have been there. We can't be there today, but what we can do is we can give them our message as we would have been giving them had this been happening. Now, core to that message is that they lie. They lie about the numbers that they have on these marches. We've been at all their marches and we've counted almost all of them, and we have shown that sometimes they exaggerate their figures by up to 25 times. For example, in Edinburgh last year, Joanna Cherry, the SNP lady, she claimed there was 250,000 on the march, when in fact we counted them and we found 11,286 of them. So an absolutely absurd calculation. In Glasgow this time last year, they claimed they had 100,000. We filmed them from a vantage point and we counted them. And it's fairly easy to do when you're looking down on them. If you've got the wherewithal and the patience to do it, you can do it. It will take you a couple of hours. And we counted 8,796 of them. Okay? Fewer than 10 times what they were claiming. So these people are just lying crazily. And the ridiculous thing about it is that the mainstream media that we would rely upon to tell us the truth and to look into these things and to broadcast the truth publicly are not interested in something like that, which they should entirely be interested in, because this is core to the SNP propaganda machine, that there are apparently hundreds of thousands of people marching throughout Scotland, when in fact we are proving consistently that it is the same number of people. And don't get us wrong, 10,000 is a good number to get out on the streets. If you can get 10,000 out on the streets, you're doing well. That's a good number. You should be content with that. But don't try to lie and pretend that it's 100,000 or 200,000 or 250,000. That's just beyond the pale. And what you're doing, of course, it's deliberate, because you're trying to make unionists feel that we're somehow outnumbered and that the game's up, the game's a bogey, because of all these huge numbers of people marching, when in fact 10,000 people might be a lot of people, but there's some football games on a Saturday that will have more people than that in their stadium alone. So we have to be there, and we have to keep counting them. I'll give you another example. Back in January, just a few months ago, they had a march at the beginning of the year. It was very bad weather, but we had over 100 of us were out, our thin red line of supporters. We were out waving the Union Jack, and we counted 10,156 of them, passing in around 80 minutes. It was 84 minutes to be precise. However, the Scottish Nationalists claimed it was 80,000. So in other words, what they're saying is that they were able to shift 1,000 people a minute down Union Street, which is where we counted them. 1,000 people a minute? I mean, what were they, on hoverboards or something like that? You couldn't get 1,000 people a minute if you packed them all onto a jet aircraft and flew down Union Street. Not within 1 minute. And yet we pointed this out to the media that night, to no avail, unfortunately, to no avail, but we pointed it out on social media to great avail, if that's an expression. We got a lot of people retweeting our true message and our truth. And so that's why we're so important, because when the mainstream media don't do their job, we at A Force for Good are here to do the job that we would normally expect them to do. And it's important because it is political propaganda. It is political propaganda, and we cannot allow them to succeed. And we cannot allow SNP MPs to use those figures and sit in television studios and use those figures without being properly challenged. That's our job. We have to properly challenge them, and we have to provide the means to enable that. And what we do is we video the marches, and we put the video up on our official report that day. And it will be usually in the evening, because we've had to take time to count the marchers. But what we find AUOB does is that they make up a number before the march has even ended. In fact, they make up a number before the march has even begun. That's what they do. They make up a number before the march has even begun. How many people do you think we should have? Well, last time we said 100,000. So maybe this time we should say 125,000, just to make it look like there's more. Oh, aye, good idea. Nobody's going to challenge us on that, is there? Of course not. Who's going to bother to count the march? We are going to bother to count the march. That's the thing. That's what you didn't rely upon. That's why you get so annoyed by us. That's why you hate us. Because you rate us. You realise that we are the people that are standing between you and you getting your lies accepted as lies. So we're here to tell the truth, and thank goodness we are here, and thank goodness that our supporters are keeping this organisation going, because without our supporters, without our regular monthly supporters, we couldn't be doing this. And we certainly couldn't be doing it in a time like this, where society is being locked down. So not only that, but we've begun to challenge the media now. This report came out in the Glasgow Evening Times, which has the same editor, I might add, as the national newspaper. and it claimed that there was 80,000 on the march. And so we took that up with the Independent Press Standards Organisation, and that is still going through the process at the moment. But when we find out what the result of this is, we'll make sure to let you know about that. But we're not going to allow newspapers to get away with this. When these marches begin again next year, we will have in place a system where we will be able to go to all the newspapers who repeat the lies and make an official complaint about the lies, if their headlines and if their articles have not properly made it clear that these are simply estimations from the organisers of these marches. Because we cannot go in, God forbid there's a second referendum, but if we go in to a second referendum with the Scottish mainstream media talking about these crazy figures of marches, oh, there was 200,000, there was 250,000, there was 300,000, when in fact the truth is 10 to 12,000. If those lies are being promoted by the mainstream media, then we are in trouble. Okay, so that's something that has to get knocked on the head, and it has to get sorted out. Now, as I say, we're talking about that today because today, the 2nd of May, would have been the day when the separatist shufflers, the divisive dawdlers, were winding their weary and wobbly way through the streets of Glasgow. Winding their weary way. That's a Scottish song somewhere. I think that's the Alexander Brothers. If you can think of where that line comes from, please send it in. Talking about sending things in, we want to hear from you, please, on Twitter and on Facebook. If you like what we're saying, please tell us. If you have a question for us, please tell us. If you don't like what we're saying, please tell us in a nice way, and we might answer your point of view if we deem it appropriate. So please do send in your comments, send in your thoughts, send in your questions, because we'd like to hear from you today, the 2nd of May. Now, what we were hearing is that the Scottish Nationalist Party members are not having any marches this year. But they are going to be having them again next year if things open up as we would normally expect. And their march in Glasgow is going to be on the auspicious day of the 1st of May, which was yesterday. Now, the 1st of May is a great day in the history of the United Kingdom because it is the day of the Union of Parliaments in 1707. It is British Union Day. When we think of May Day, the 1st of May, we often think about the beginning of summer, or lately in the latter half of the 20th century, we were thinking about Trade Union Day, 1st of May, but it is also the British Union Day, and a Force for Good and other unionists have taken it upon ourselves to make this much better known, and to make this a day of celebration, and to make it a day of thanks, indeed, to give thanks for the Union, because it was on the 1st of May that a country was born whose name was to become great, quite literally, and which was to become a giant among nations, because it was the parliamentary union which helped us all in our islands to take off socially, culturally, economically and internationally, and to become a giant among nations. And it was the parliamentary union which did that. England on its own could not have done that. Some people think at the time England would have been powerful enough just to go its own way. No, it would not have been. Nor, of course, would Scotland have been. It required the two to come together. It required the wisdom of the unicorn combined with the strength of the lion, as we indeed see in the British coat of arms, the Scottish unicorn and what was considered the English lion. to become two great British symbols united in the coat of arms, wisdom and strength. And it required that in order for Britain to become great, which is exactly what happened, because as it says in the treaty, in the act of, well, there were two acts. The English Parliament passed the act, it's passed the Union with Scotland Act in 1706, and the Scottish Parliament passed the Union with England Act in 1707, and the two of these are considered the acts, plural, of union, and they were both the same, and both parliaments agreed it, that the two kingdoms of Scotland and England shall, upon the 1st day of May, next ensuing the date thereof, and forever after, be united into one kingdom by the name Great Britain. Great Britain in capitals. They were shouting that out. They were shouting that one out. And they went on, that the United Kingdom of Great Britain be represented by one and the same Parliament, to be styled the Parliament of Great Britain. And they went on, and this is an interesting point, that all the subjects of the United Kingdom of Great Britain shall, from and after the Union, have full freedom and intercourse of trade and navigation to and from any port or place within the said United Kingdom. And that's quite relevant to us today when we hear things about the SNP, or maybe the media just promoting it, saying that, oh, they're going to close the border, or the border with England might be closed because of this COVID thing. Well, if that was to happen, that would definitely be in contravention of the Treaty of Union that says we must have full freedom and intercourse of trade and navigation to and from any port or place within the United Kingdom. And we did a little video on that. We have a fantastic video editor who has been doing lots of good work for us in the past several months, and our crowdfunder at Christmas was able to retain this person to do this work. And yesterday this person created a little video called Happy British Union Day, and it was a 1-minute video. We put it out on Facebook, and I looked at it an hour ago, it had 10,000 views on Facebook, and on Twitter it had 14,000 views and rising. So maximum thanks to that person who does our video. This person also uploads the lives to YouTube and also cuts a couple of segments from each video and puts them out during the course of the coming week, which then garner even more views on Facebook and even more views on Twitter. So we're maintaining our profile. We're maintaining our profile, keeping it high at this time. And that we're only able to do this video work because of the union supporters who help us monthly. So thank you to everybody who gives. As I say, if you've any questions about what we do here in our office and with our work, please send them in. If you've any questions related to what's happening at the moment, please send them in. And is that a question that's come in there? Sort of somebody saying, oh, it's a waste of time to count the marches. Oh, aye, it's like, imagine you're a general in a war and you look through your binoculars and you say, oh, there's a lot of people coming down the road, and you turn to your adjutant and you go, how many do you think there are, Captain? And the captain goes, who cares? You know, it's just like people. Who cares about that? Oh, yeah, true enough. We don't need to know how many people are coming down the road, do we? No. Goodness sake. Aye, that's not the way that the world works. You need to know what you're up against, okay? We have a democracy in this country. How many people voted for the Tories? How many people voted for Labour? Who cares? Well, who cares about the numbers? Well, why does that matter? Well, maybe there'll be more people for one than for the other. Who cares? Aye, no. See, we're not even going to grace that with a response that is anything other than taking the mickey out of that. Because, you know, What's next? Coherent arguments in favour of the union. Good. If you would like that, then please go to our website, aforceforgood.uk. We have been, it's a Twitter question, we have been making those coherent philosophical arguments for the British Union on a economic basis, cultural basis, social basis, historical basis, political and democratic basis since the 21st of March 2012. And we've been doing it virtually every day. And we have a legacy site, aforceforgood.org.uk, where we have a huge amount of material there. There's even one article, a speech actually, which we're extremely proud of, called The British Union from 30 First Principles. And that lays it out from like the bottom up. 30 principles of union. Nobody's ever put that stuff together. Nobody ever will again. It's a consequence of the political circumstances that we've found ourselves subjected to in the last 8 to 10 years. So if you want coherent arguments, please go to our websites. Our legacy one, which we stopped publishing on in 2018, has a lot of good stuff. That's aforceforgood.org.uk. And our new one, aforceforgood.uk, where you can find all the updated material and where you can find all the reports of the marches, where we show the extent to which we are being vilely propagandized against by sheer force of lies, which are not being properly challenged by the mainstream media. And that's a concern, because we were reading an article recently. I'm just going to reach over. I'm just going to reach over for this because it's relevant. It was published in the New Statesman by somebody who appears... It's one of these people who's doing a PhD in... PhD in an ology, shall we say, that is not going to get him any work at all in the future, other than perhaps being a commentator on the Nationals Twitter page, you know. So anyways, he's wasting his life doing an ology into the relationship between the radical left and nationalism in Scotland, okay? And he thinks he's an expert on this, and he's writing in the New Statesman about what the SNP should do in order to win independence, because he's obviously a Scottish nationalist, and he's talking about it. And I was reading this, okay, because I have to subject myself to this stuff so that you don't have to, and I thought, you're missing out somebody here. You know, you're talking like it's the Scottish people against the Tories. What you're missing out is the 55% of people in Scotland who don't want to break up the United Kingdom. You are basically working through your PhD as if we do not exist. Oh, what about these unionist people who want to keep the United Kingdom together? Oh, just ignore them. But they are the majority, the 55% of the population. Well, if you talk about them, you have to listen to them, and then you have to get into their arguments and so on. Far better that we just pretend that Nicola Sturgeon is the voice of all of Scotland, and she's being held back by some wicked English Etonian with blonde hair and blue eyes. That's a much easier frame to get our way. As for like the over 2 million people who don't want to break up, just forget, just don't talk to them. They don't exist. Pretend they don't exist. This is how these people get their way. And I'm not joking, because I've just said we've been going since 21st of March 2012. We are one of the premier voices of grassroots unionism. We've never been approached by the BBC. We've never been approached by STV or SNP TV, to give it its proper name. And we're not expecting to be approached. We're not waiting for a telephone call anytime soon. So the way the mainstream media in Scotland deal with us and to deal with grassroots unionism is just ignore it. Pretend it doesn't exist. Let's just pretend this is some kind of contest between the SNP and all the people in Scotland who apparently support the SNP and the wicked Tories. And don't get us wrong, our organisation is not party political. We don't care who's in power in Westminster as long as they're keeping the United Kingdom together. But that's the way it's being framed by these people. And the only way they can get their way is just to pretend that the grassroots doesn't exist. And in many ways, who are the voices of grassroots unionism in Scotland anyway? You know, other than party politicians. There's not that many, I suppose, around. So that's something. More questions coming in here. In 2014, the SNP stated that an independent Scotland's wealth would be based on oil. In 2020, the price of oil has fallen below the price of toilet paper. Is the SNP basing its wealth on toilet paper? At this moment, toilet paper is much more sought after than oil. And that's a good question, because we were going to come to that. We may as well touch on it. Just now. But, you know, there was a book published in... well, I've got it here, so I'll just tell you. It was this doorstopper. Do you remember it? Scotland's Future. Scotland's Future. When I hold that up to the Facebook camera, the words, the letters will be reversed, but it should be okay on the Twitter camera. Scotland's Future, your guide to a separated Scotland, or an independent Scotland as they called it. And this was published by the Scottish Government. Remember, we talked about them last week. That's their new logo. So original that. I mean, who came up with that? It's amazing. Saltire, never have thought of that. Incredible. I mean, how much? I bet they paid, you know, £50,000 to a design company to come up with that. Saltire. Incredible originality there. Anyway, they came up with this. Well, no, they did not come up with this book. It's 650 pages, and it was researched for them by the British Civil Service, which is to say the civil service in Scotland, which is an arm of the British state in Scotland. And they did this. The British Civil Service did this. They created a 650-page book on how to mess up, how to destroy our United Kingdom. Now, when you think about that, that's an absolute appalling outrage which should never have happened. It should never have happened. And we've written about this. And if anybody's got the link, stick it up on the Facebook thread there about how how we must never allow the British Civil Service again to be allowed to be involved in a separation referendum. If the British Civil Service up here in Scotland is figuring out how to get dog licensing sorted out, or how to, you know, monitor pizzas or whatever they do these days, then sure, that's fine, but you should not be allowed to break up the country that is paying your own wages, okay? So that should not be allowed, and it should not be allowed again. And if the British Civil Service is allowed to help the SNP at any future referendum, then we are all in trouble, because a force for good can't produce this kind of stuff. You guys out there can't produce that kind of stuff. There's nobody who can produce this sort of stuff. This is like, I mean, it's a load of nonsense at the end of the day, but it's still an impressive document called Scotland's Future. Now, on page 300, they talk about oil, and in the 30 years from 2011, 99% of UK offshore oil production will come from Scotland's geographical share of the current UK continental shelf, blah, 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 blah. In other words, it's saying that the price of oil, and oil is something that could be a major factor within the Scottish economy. Well, we've seen recently just how impossible and how unlikely that is going to be, because the last time I looked, the price of oil per barrel has now fallen to a negative. And it was pointed out to me by a colleague a couple of days ago that the price of oil, when he last looked, was minus $31 per barrel. And what this means is that if Scotland had a barrel of oil, it would have to pay somebody $31 to take it away. Okay? And this book is trying to tell us, and the SNP tried to tell us, in 2014 that we should base our economy around the price of oil? How absurd to base an economy upon such a volatile commodity. Such a volatile commodity. And you know what? It was and the price of oil isn't really going to get much better these days, because Russia and Saudi Arabia, for reasons best known to themselves, are flooding the market with it at a time of depressed demand, because fewer people are, of course, travelling worldwide these days, with everybody being stuck at home. So oil's not going to get any better, and then even if it did, it can't be relied upon. So we have to just forget the oil thing for the moment. Don't get us wrong, we love the British oil industry and we would like to see it being a success, and it's sad in many ways that it's struggling, but we have to be realistic at the same time. And it was pointed out as soon as this was published, this book, that Scotland's future, would you believe, is a precise anagram of fraudulent costs. Scotland's future is an anagram of fraudulent costs. How amazing. How amazing. So oil is not the solution, and thank you for pointing that out. Toilet paper is in fact in greater demand than oil these days. Got some other questions here which I'm just checking while I look here. So I would like to see AFFG do a Scottish tour, educating and embracing the safety and all positive aspects of the British political union. Too many people don't know enough about the unions. You know, that's a really good idea. Doing an AFFG tour, coming to a town or city near you. I would very much like to do that. At the moment, it's about capacity, as in, well, presuming when things get back to normal, do we have the capacity to do that? Do we have the resources, in other words, to do it? We certainly have the knowledge to do it. It's something we could look into, something maybe we could even crowdfund for. But if there were to be a second referendum, believe us, we would be doing a tour like what Jim Murphy did very well, very successfully back in the run-up to the 2014 election. He went around towns and villages and cities, stood on a milk crate and held forth, and well done him. Well done him. He did a really good job. He was perhaps the union's most vociferous and best campaigner at the time, him and George Galloway. So we've got them to thank in many ways for the good result. We would certainly be doing something like that if there were to be a second referendum. We would be straight out there, and we'd be crowdfunding for that as well. And that would be really, really good. Actually, really enjoy that. And I know that we would build up. What it also requires is for us as an organisation to have people in towns and villages who are willing to do stuff, you know. So if you are somewhere and you would like to set up a street stall, please contact us. What will happen, and I'm talking about when things get back to normal, we would invite you to one of our street stalls in Glasgow. We would show you the ropes, and we would help you to acquire the materials that you need, and we would encourage you in any way that we could. So if you're somebody in a town or city in Scotland and you'd like to be further associated with A Force for Good, then do contact us, because, you know, if not you, then who? It's not as if there are huge numbers of people out there who are going to do this sort of thing. The number of people who will become politically active is very few. It's always very few. The number of people who are interested in politics is very few. Of those numbers, the ones who will actually do stuff is fewer still. So if it occurs to you, then you could be one of those people. And we'll make sure everything's good for you. We'll make sure you know what you're doing, and we'll help you. So if we're always looking for those sorts of people. So please do feel free to contact us at any time at our website, aforceforgood.uk, or email contact@aforceforgood.uk. Or send us a Facebook message or a Twitter message or whatever, and we'll get back to you. So yeah, thank you for that suggestion, for the person who suggested why don't we do a tour. That was from Brian. Thank you. And then Joe's saying, what can we do to bring attention to the SNP's many failings? Well, that's a big ask, isn't it? That is up mainly to our politicians to do that. And I would, what can we do as people? Help a force for good in whatever way that we are doing things, because we're raising the profile of the union, whatever we may be doing, such as, for example, at this moment, or when we're out with our street stalls, or when we're out with our thin red line, when the SNP supporters are passing. And I always like to say that they are the SNP supporters, because they'll say, oh no, we're multi-party. Aye, well, what's the other parties? The Scottish Cabbage Party, right? The Soggy Greens, they don't really count as a proper party. Oh, but then there's some like Socialist Party that you last heard of back in the 1970s, who have arrived on a time machine, you know, to march with you, all four of them. So, no, you're not a multi-party organisation. Don't give me that nonsense, okay? You're the SNP marching. That's what you are, okay? And when it comes to the vote, you're not going to vote for these guys from the 1970s going on about Mao Zedong or something like that. You're going to vote for the Scottish National Party. So you're Scottish National Party supporters. And yeah, somebody pointing out there also that that it's not really independence if we're within the European Union. That's that's certainly something. So send in any questions that you have, please. And please, if you're on Twitter, please retweet this. Now, if you retweet this with a comment, a positive comment, what that means is that we can then retweet your comment. We can retweet what you've just done to 25,000 people. So that's a way for you to be seen and heard as well. So please, on Twitter, please retweet. Click the button. It will say retweet or retweet with comment. Click retweet with comment. Make a positive comment, even if it's just hashtag British and Proud, or hashtag AUOB Glasgow, because that's going around today. Just send it out there, and then we will retweet that. We will retweet you to 25,000 people. And we are building our Twitter all the time, and it's a good way for us at this moment to be seen and to be heard. So please do that, or share on Facebook. So going back to the oil thing, it's not, you have to have a diverse economy. You can't be relying upon one thing, and especially not a volatile resource such as oil. It can be part of the equation, but you should always be prepared to write it off in the sense that it could be on some years it could be a negative for you. So you have to be wise about that. And hitherto the Scottish Nationalists have not been wise about the oil resource, and they've imagined that it's just a gold mine at the bottom of the rainbow, when in fact it's far more complicated than that. And what we need in the British Union, whether we're in Scotland or England or Northern Ireland or Wales, is to be able to rely on each other. Okay, and that's what's at the heart of the values of unionism. It's that British-wide solidarity. That we know that if our brother in Wales, or our sister in Northern Ireland, or our cousin in Scotland, or our uncle in England is suffering, we can all pull together to help. Okay, and we don't fuss and fight about one part of the family, thinking that this part of the family is more privileged or requires better treatment than the other. We try to treat each other as equally as possible. And that's one of the things that we wrote about in our on our legacy site on the 30 points of the Union, and anybody that can see that, you can go to aforceforgood.org.uk or fire it up there in the comments, our speech about the 30 principles of British Union. British Union from 31st Principles, that was the title of the speech. Last year we were in London and we gave a speech, 50 men and women who created the Union. And we haven't published that one yet, but during this time we're going to publish that one and get it up on our website, forceforgood.uk. That's a really interesting historical tour de force, 50 men and women who created the British Union. We actually cut that one down from 100 men and women to 50, just to fit the time frame. So what was I saying? Yes, going back to the broad shoulders of the Union, there was a really good article, letter in the Herald this week, titled "The Union Gives Us Strong Shoulders to Lean On in Time of Need." And it was pointed out, not only did the Union support us when the Scottish banks went upside down in 2008, not only were the Scottish banks bailed out, but Scotland at the moment has been receiving around about £4 billion from the British Treasury. Well, that's huge money that Scotland on its own could never have come up with, you know. Indeed, how the British Treasury comes up with that is going to be a question that remains to be answered. But at least it's come up with it at the moment, and it is one of the strongest economies in the world, and so it is going to be okay in the long run. But that's something that we on our own could not have come up with. And so, as this person says, this unprecedented intervention was only achievable because it rests on the strong shoulders of the Union. The reality is that an independent Scotland could have collapsed had it faced the COVID-19 crisis alone. With tough times ahead, it would therefore be catastrophic economically for Scotland to go it alone by cutting itself adrift from the UK, which is the 6th largest economy in the world, which is what we were just alluding to there. So while the SNP remain entitled to make the emotional case, they can't really make the economic case. And that's so true. It's so true. And somebody else goes on, how very sad that we are in a position where the UK cannot speak as one during the coronavirus crisis, and factions have opened up, all leading to confusion and exacerbating our already fractured society. That is so true, and it is just a playground now for politicians who are trying to find things that are going wrong at every level without concentrating on getting the big picture, which ideally should be to open up the economy as soon as is humanly possible. So thank you for watching. We're going to be here until 2 o'clock. We've got 15 minutes. In this time, I want to talk about what's coming up this week in British history, because one of the things that we do at A Force for Good is we understand the importance of the past for understanding the present, and indeed for giving inspiration for the future. And we learn from the past, and we use the past as an example to do better. Not to say that we always did the right thing, but to know what we did and how can we improve. So the past is a learning opportunity for us. And just as, for example, yesterday we brought to many people's attention the fact of British Union Day, we're bringing people's attention to things that have happened in our past that hitherto they have not necessarily given thought to. So I'm just going to touch on that. I noticed there's a question that's come in. No, it's a statement that we need to make the same noise as the SNP crowd. Yes, well, when we are on the streets, when the thin red line is on the streets, we certainly do make noise, positive, uplifting noise. We certainly do. Now, yeah, what's coming up this week in British history? Well, yesterday was the 1st of May, British Union Day. Tomorrow, the 3rd of May, was a very auspicious day. That's the second time I've used that word, I notice, in this broadcast. It was a very auspicious, the third time, in Glasgow history, because it was the day when George VI and Queen Elizabeth, who became the Queen Mother, came to Glasgow to open the Empire exhibition. And in Bellahouston Park, which is a great big Victorian park in Glasgow, they had this massive exhibition. Now, it really was quite something. It lasted for 6 months, from the 3rd of May until the 29th of October 1938. So it was 1 year before World War II, and it was the last major Empire exhibition in Britain, and it was the 5th of all the major exhibitions in Britain. It was the second Empire one. The first one had been at Wembley 14 years earlier, and the idea was conceived in February 1937, and 15 months later the whole of Bellahouston Park was covered in new buildings which were representing various parts of the empire and various parts of industry as well. And as somebody noted, 15 months to build that entire exhibition. Today, you couldn't get planning permission in 15 months. Anyway, one of the centerpiece was something called the Tower of Empire, which sat at the top of Bellahouston Hill, and it was 300 feet high. It was modern sort of Art Deco, and unfortunately it would still be here, but it was a casualty of World War II because everything was taken down, including the Tower of Empire, lest it be a signpost for German bombers once the war came around. So we would have the Tower of Empire up there on Bellahouston Hill in Glasgow, were it not for World War II. The only building remaining standing is the Palace of Art, which is a gym these days. So it's still standing. It's looking a bit shoddy, actually. Glasgow City Council need to give it a lick of paint. They need to wash up the flagpoles, and they need to get it sorted because it's looking pretty poor at the moment. But that was yesterday. We're going to post all the information about that on our Facebook page, UK A Force for Good, tomorrow. We were told last year when we did this that in fact one of the buildings was taken down, the Palace of Engineering was taken down, and it was reassembled and moved to Prestwick Airport, where it still stands and where it is manufacturing parts for airplanes today. Outside Prestwick, Spirit Aerosystems. If you Google that, you'll see the building that was in Bellahouston Park that's been taken down. So that's 3rd of May. 5th of May, oh my goodness, 5th of May was a very, an amazing day really in British history in 1980. And it was the day that the SAS rescued the hostages in the Iranian embassy on live television. And 6 Arabs had taken over the embassy and taken 26 hostages. I say Arabs because they didn't want to be called Iranians. They wanted their own little province in that area. And they took 26 people hostage. Now, of those 26, 5 were released. 1 was killed by the terrorists before the rescue, and 1 was killed by the terrorists during the rescue. But the rescue, as we know, happened. It was successful. 19 hostages were freed, and of the 6 terrorists, 5 were killed by the SAS, who suffered no fatalities. And this came on the 5th of May 1980, and it did change the British consciousness in some way, because during the 1970s you switched on the television and all you were hearing was the IRA bombing the hell out of British cities and out of British people in Northern Ireland. And everybody was like, why? We just won the Second World War. How can't we beat these terrorists? And there's various reasons for that, obviously, and various reasons for that. But the point is, people were really on a low during the 1970s as far as British greatness was concerned. And suddenly, 5th of May 1980 comes along and the SAS kicked arse. Seriously, live on public television. And people were just amazed by this. It's like, what, Britain can still do this? That's amazing. We've still got soldiers who can do something successfully and beat the bad guys. So it was a formative moment in modern British history. And whether or not we built on that, I don't know, but it definitely changed many people's views from a Britain that was on the skids, basically, to something that can assert itself in the world. And an amazing day in British history. And a book's been written about it called Go, 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 mainly by Rusty Furman, who calls himself the soldier with no gloves because he can be pictured. When you see the pictures, he's the one that's got no gloves on. And this is the definitive study. I'm reading it this week. It's really, really good. The definitive inside story of the Iranian embassy siege. At 1924 hours, on the 5th of May 1980, 55 men from the SAS regiment began their mission to rescue the hostages inside the Iranian embassy in London on the order Go, Go, Go. So check that out if you want. I'm just going to show you something in this book, by the way. Go, 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 to Alistair, from Rusty Furman, the man with no gloves. My very best wishes, Rusty. There you go, fantastic. One of my prized possessions here. So, yes, that was the 5th of May. What else? 8th of May is going to be VE Day. Victory in Europe Day is what's meant by that. That's the day, on the 8th of May 1945, 75 years ago, the formal acceptance by the Allies of the German surrender. An amazing day in British history. Ironically, this year, a day where we're meant to be celebrating our freedom and our liberty, which was presumably assured by that victory, we will nevertheless be unfree in our own homes, locked down, unable to celebrate the freedom and liberty. So that's kind of ironic. I don't know what to make of that, but that's going to be the day anyway when that happened 75 years ago, and we'll be writing about that as well on our Facebook and our Twitter. Please, ladies and gentlemen, check out our Facebook page. Thank you. And somebody says Guernsey and Jersey were liberated the next day, 9th of May. That's correct. And in fact, the 9th of May is the Channel Islands Independence Day. They celebrate that every year on the 9th of May. Liberation Day is what they call it. Yes, because there had been German forces occupying the Channel Islands during that period of time. So check out our Twitter and our Facebook and our Instagram, which is the most colourful Instagram page on unionism out there. We post on these every day, okay? Several times every day we post on our social media platforms, which are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also YouTube. You can go to our youtube.com channel, which is UK A Force for Good, and check out this video, which will be uploaded this week, along with segments from this video, which will also be uploaded. And check out also our podcasts, because we have a very good podcast editor. We're so grateful to this person for doing that. They're going to rip the audio from this today, and they'll get that podcast up on our website, aforceforgood.uk/podcast. And you can also search for it on Spotify, on Spreaker, on Podchaser, and on Deezer. Those 4 platforms. If you go onto them, if you're part of them, search for A Force for Good podcast page, and you'll get you'll get our latest podcasts. Because some people prefer podcasts, they can just switch them on and listen to them while they're around the house or while they're doing other things. So please give some love to our podcast page, A Force for Good /podcast. Good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening this week. It's been a pleasure. I think I've covered most of the things that I want to cover. Please retweet people giving us a wave. Give a wave back. Good stuff. We can't do this without your help. And without people who support us, this wouldn't be happening. And so thank you to the people who do support us. These are our union supporters. And these are people who give monthly, anything from £1.15 a week upwards. And if you feel you've had value from this, and if you feel that what we're doing is valuable, then please do become a union supporter. Somebody's saying there on Twitter, it's great to hear a Scottish voice which is positive for the union. Absolutely. There's so many of us that don't have a voice. It's like what I was saying earlier. You know, who is speaking for grassroots unionism today? If you leave aside the politicians, who is being invited onto talk shows? Who is being spoken about in the mainstream media? Who's a grassroots unionist? It's not very many. And so that's why the SNP think they can get away by just simply ignoring us. But they can't ignore us because you guys are making sure that there's a voice that is being heard, and we're so grateful. If you think you've got value, please go to aforceforgood.uk /union-supporters, where you can donate via donor box per month, or go to aforceforgood.uk /other-payment-methods, where you can donate via PayPal or go cardless or whatever. But we do need your help to keep going here. And I want to say thank you to the team behind this, the Facebook team, the Twitter team, and the political outreach team, who have been watching and who have been doing good work as well with us. Together, we are going to get this sorted. Together, we're going to keep the United Kingdom together. We're going to stand for the great kingdom of United Britain. And when we say Britain, we mean all the islands of our British archipelago. So thanks for that. Here's somebody, have you ever thought about talking in schools? Well, that's something you would only do if you were invited to do so. If somebody invited us to speak in a school, that's something that we would do. Yeah, absolutely. There are serious problems with modern studies departments in Scotland indoctrinating pupils to vote SNP. That's for sure. Oh my goodness, we have got a side project where we're looking at that, and it's frightening, some of the stuff. That some of the assumptions that are just there are appalling. But that's another matter, and that's another broadcast for another time. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. We'll be here next week at 1 PM on Facebook and on Twitter, our Saturday Street Stall. So, guys, thank you so much for everything. God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the Queen.